Thank you for joining me on this podcast. This is Jim Gibson, and the podcast is Business Sense. So you want to go into business. Are you sure you want to go in business? No, I mean, are you really sure you want to be in business? You know, I find out, as we mentioned in the last podcast, is that 9 out of 10 people who go in business today will be out of business within 5 years. And guess what? After 5 years, 9 out of 10 of those people would have lost their business. So being in business, being an entrepreneur is a tough thing today, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the different personality types. We're going to talk about some situations that I have seen in my past that can help you and hopefully help you to be successful, help you to be that 1 in 10 that succeeds each and every 5 years. I've been in business for over 28 years, and that's just one of many businesses I started. All of them have been successful. I learned a lot from each one, but the longest one was Nova Voice and Data Systems, and that was an IT business. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the specifics of IT when it comes to business sense today. But to start with, if you remember in the last broadcast, I talked about one of my great employees. One of the employees, I really liked the guy. A little bit arrogant, but I really liked him. And he decided after 10 years that he was going to go in business for himself. And I said, well, I understand, 10 years, hey, you're giving me a lot of your years, and I really enjoyed working with you, and I've learned from you, and you've learned from me, and I've sent you to school, and I've invested in you and everything else, but it's time to move on. Fantastic. Hey, do you want to sit down and talk about it? Maybe I can help you. Maybe I can tell you what to watch out for, and I can give you some free counseling and stuff like that, because I'd love to see you succeed, even though you'll become a competitor, hopefully not in my area, but in your area. You'll stay to your neighborhood. And he looked at me kind of strange. He kind of giggled a little bit, and he said, what makes you think that I'd be interested in any of your advice? And I thought, wow, that's really arrogant. And then, of course, as you heard the story in the last podcast, he didn't last too long. Maybe 6 months at the most, and he was out of business. But the shame on this was that it affected his family, it affected his future, it demotivated him. He probably ended up in serious debt because of that. And he could have avoided a lot of it if we would have sat down and just had some friendly discussions, ways that I could help him in areas and that maybe he didn't know about. And so today we're going to talk about some of those things. We're going to talk about, who are you? Are you ready to run a business? Are you ready to start a business? Are you sure? Do you really want to do this? Are you crazy? Some people think so, but other people have been very successful. I have been very successful. I have, as I said, my best success has always been with Nova Voice and Data Systems, and of course with CableSupply.com, and there's a lot of YouTube account. I have 250 some videos on there at this point of recording that shows you how to do a lot of the cabling of buildings. And of course, there's a lot more in IT, and we'll cover those in the future. But I've learned a lot in IT in 28 years. But you know something? You think you're going into an IT business, or you think you're going into a specific business, but in reality, what you're going to become is you're going to become a personnel manager. You're going to be a strategist, and you're going to find out that you spend most of your time running the business rather than being the technician. But, you got to pay attention to these things, because there's 4 types of people who start and run businesses. And the first one is an entrepreneur. You got to be an entrepreneur to start a business. Well, maybe you don't have to be an entrepreneur. Maybe what you need to be is just a person who can act as an entrepreneur. I didn't say that you're acting, you're pretending, but you can take up the role of an entrepreneur. And then the second thing you're going to have to be is you're going to have to be a manager of resources and equipment and scheduling and things like that. And of course, you manage things, but you really lead people. So you're going to have to learn how to lead people and manage those. I guess you got to manage their schedules and, what they do and how they do it, and figure out how to get more training to them or whatever is needed. And then, of course, the next area that you're going to have to be is you're going to have to be the technician. And here could be the downfall, because you think you're a great technician, therefore you should be in business. That's how a lot of people make mistakes. Just because you're a great technician doesn't mean you're going to be a great business owner. It really doesn't. And you got to watch this, because if you're a great technician, I mean, you really know your stuff. In the IT world, if you know Cisco and Microsoft and, Meraki, and you know how to cable and everything else, well, you got a leg up compared to some other people out there. But the bottom line is that there's more to it than just being a technician. And what you're going to find out is, if you're successful, you're going to spend very little time as a technician, but you're still going to need that knowledge, because you're still going to use that when dealing with your technicians. You're still going to have to be the leader, because that's what people do. They lead. So the first thing we talked about was you got to be an entrepreneur. The second thing is you got to be a manager. The third thing is you got to be a technician. And then lastly, you got to be a salesperson. Whether you like it or not, you got to be a salesperson. So you got to learn all these things. And sometimes you need to take a little bit of effort before you start a business and make sure you scope out, make sure you plan how you're going to do each of these, So, let's take, for instance, the manager. Well, manager, man, you got to manage the resources. So what are you going to do with your data? You got to have databases. How are you going to handle those databases? And on top of that, you're also going to have to know a little bit about accounting. So, for me, I use QuickBooks. QuickBooks Online is fantastic. Anything online, by the way, I think is great, because it's more secure. I know that as a cybersecurity person. It's more secure. It's convenient. I can go on vacation. I can open up my laptop anywhere in the world, and I can see where I'm at when it comes to my accounting. I can see where it's at on the website. I can see where I get my email. So you need to be comfortable with some of that technology if you're not. But you need to take some classes in accounting. You need to learn accounting and things like that. So as a manager, you need to do those things. But the last thing you need is that salesman. And some people just aren't salesmen. And it's really a shame, because you don't have to be the world's best salesman, but you have to be a salesman till you can afford to hire a good salesman. And then some of the things that I was the weakest in, I think, when I was in business, is salesmen. It was hard to find a good salesman. It was hard to train a salesman, because I'm more technical oriented. I can sell. Let me tell you, I got national awards from Toshiba, my supplier, where I was the best in the West Coast, and they didn't give out the best for the country, but they only gave out the best for the West and best for the East. And every single year, for the years I was with Toshiba, I won that. But the bottom line is, I did all four of these things, and you have to learn to do all four. Now, you don't have to love them, but you have to learn them. And if you love them, you're going to do really good at it. But if you're really good at it, then you can find good people to take your place in each of these areas. But you got to have all four. Now, it's kind of interesting, because I was watching that movie, The Founder, and it's an interesting movie. And if you're interested in business, you might want to take a look at that movie and see if you can scope out the different personalities in that movie. Who is the entrepreneur in that movie? It was about Ray Kroc. It was about the McDonald's brothers. It was about how they started McDonald's. It was about all those things. Who was the technician in that movie? Who is the entrepreneur? Who is the manager? Who is the salesperson? And if you look at it really close, you can identify it. And that's really a good training, to be honest with you. What's interesting is I went to school for business. I got a master's in business administration and personnel management. It was a dual master's program. And the thing that was interesting about it is they didn't teach me a lot of this stuff. I had to learn a lot of this stuff on my own by running my own business. I had to learn about what it meant to be an entrepreneur and a manager and a salesperson and a technician, and balance all four and make sure to have the right mix at the right time, and set an example as a leader. But if you watch that movie, you'll notice that the McDonald's brothers, they're not the entrepreneur. They started out, but they got discouraged really fast, and they're actually the technicians. They learned how to produce the perfect hamburger, and I tell you what, they're really pretty good innovators for their time. Today we look at McDonald's and we say, everybody does that. It's no big deal. But if you look at it very closely, it is a big deal, because they were the first ones that did it. And if you look at McDonald's or any of the other fast food places today, pay attention to them. I mean, they really know what they're doing. They know how to price their product. They know how to produce the product at the right time. They know their customers very well. I mean, all these things are not easy. It looks easy because, you go up there and you give them a couple dollars and they give you a hamburger. A couple dollars, man. hamburger, everything's all ready, it's fresh. I mean, that's a good deal. But there's a lot of design behind that. There's a lot of entrepreneurship, the person who figured out who to hire here and who to hire there. And then they have people that manage the process. So the entrepreneur has actually designed the process to a point. Sometimes it's a technician also that designs the process. So, getting back to the movie, the two McDonald's brothers had this revolutionary idea. I mean, it was really a great idea for the time. And if you watch the movie, you could see the problems they were having with the old format and how they changed that format to a new format. And that new format was fantastic and did a great deal. They offered the customer something that no one else was offering, and exactly what the customer needed and exactly what the customer wanted at a great price. So they were fantastic when it came to the technology side. They were technicians, and that was fantastic. And they were also managers. They were managing their restaurant there in San Bernardino, doing a pretty good job of it. But they were not a true, visionary entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are visionary. They don't think about what it is today. They think about what it is in the future. And who came along? Ray Kroc. And had to argue with them over and over and over again about growth. And they dragged their feet over and over and over again. But Ray Kroc was definitely an entrepreneur, and he was also a salesman. He was a great salesman, and he figured out how to take one restaurant in San Bernardino that was successful, and he took their idea and he turned it into a national organization that produces, I imagine, billions of dollars each year all around the world. Everybody knows McDonald's, but it's a great movie, man. You could watch it 2 or 3 times and learn so much about business as watching that movie. But the idea is this, that sometimes technicians want to start a business and they want to remain a technician. And that's what I think happened to my employee. He was a great technician. And people in his family encouraged him, said, man, you should be out there. You should be the guy making all the money. It's not fair. And sometimes people don't see the other things that a business owner has to do. So what they do is they say, oh, you're doing all the work. You're getting up every day at this time. You're visiting the customer. You're doing the programming. You're doing the installation of the equipment. Man, you need to do this for yourself, rather than make someone else rich. You could do this. And that all sounds logical, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like, hey, I'm already doing it. Why don't I just do it for myself? Well, that's a technician thinking, okay? Trying to be an entrepreneur. But it's also, in this case of this young man, he didn't do his research. He didn't do his homework. And maybe if he would have taken some advice, I could have directed him on what homework to do. And we're going to cover that too in some other podcasts in the future, shortly in the future, by the way. I'm not going to wait forever, but we got to figure out, or you have to figure out, who are you? Are you an entrepreneur? But if you're an entrepreneur, that's great. Sometimes you can hire a technician. You don't have to be a technician. You just have to know enough about the industry so you hire a technician. But you got to be an entrepreneur. You got to be a starter. You got to be a visionary. You got to be the person that at night you can't get to sleep because you're thinking about all the possibilities and the things you could do. That's what you need to be. That's really the best if you want to start a company. That's where you should be. And then of course the second part, and often they go together like twins almost, is a salesperson. You got to be a salesperson. You got to believe so much in your product. You got to be the best at what you do, and it's a service organization, and your service is better than anyone else, or it's getting there. But you want people to buy from you, and you give them convincing arguments to buy from you. But, the bottom line is you got to do all 4 at the beginning when you're small. And businesses are at different levels. It's the infancy stage. You got to do all 4. And then as you start to grow, you could start delegating some of this to other people. And, we're going to talk about delegation and how to do it and how to do it effectively and things like that in future podcasts. But you really, once you start growing, you got to let go on certain areas. And some people will remain small for the whole life of the company because they don't know how to delegate and they don't know how to let go. They got to do every single thing. But something, you can't grow if you do that. But anyway, you got to be an entrepreneur. because that's the people who start businesses or entrepreneurs. Then you got to be a manager. You got to manage all the assets. And then you have to be the technician. At least you have to start as a technician, or maybe hire someone else, And we're going to talk about partnerships and forms of business and things like that in a future podcast. But today, we're just going to talk about these 4 things. And it's really interesting. In my heart, I'm an entrepreneur, man. I like starting things, certain things. I always think, I want to start something where I can make some money. And money's important. If you're poo-pooing money, man, then don't go into business, because that's the reason you go into business. It's not just to serve the customer. Yeah, of course. And you get satisfaction out of that. I used to get tremendous satisfaction when I was just working by myself with 1 or 2 employees. I would look at that backboard where we would hang that data equipment, that voice equipment, and it would look beautiful, and I'd get tremendous satisfaction. But you know something? I also had to buy the equipment. I also had to have enough money in the bank to buy the equipment. These are things we're going to talk about later. But I also had to have the right people. I had to know what they needed to know, or direct them, lead them, show them the quality that they had to have when they're installing this equipment, when they're talking to customers, educate them how to talk to customers. Some people are pretty bad at customer relations, and that could kill you. That could ruin your business if you get a person who works for you and doesn't return phone calls, treats people, looks down their nose at customers, things like that. So, there's a lot of businesses out there that maybe if you're thinking about starting a business, look at other businesses. Maybe work for a business that's similar to what you want to start, and just be honest. Don't steal from them. That's unacceptable. And don't steal training from them either. So if they're going to train you, then have an agreement that you're going to stay there for a certain time period that you both agree about or agree on. And I used to have people where I would send people to training. I would send some of my employees to training. And I remember this one or couple situations happened like this. I would spend thousands of dollars sending them to school. Now, today you don't have to do everything online, which is pretty cost effective. But, 20 years ago, they had to go to a class. So I would pay for the transportation. I would pay for their lunches. I would give them a salary to sit in class and learn. And then in some cases, not always, but in some cases, I'd have to pay for the training itself. Then I remember once sitting in my office, and on Friday, the guy came back and he had his certificate there. He passed the class. And great, you better pass the class. I spent a lot of money on you sitting there. And if you're sitting there just blowing bubbles on your bubble gum, then you're not going to last in my business much longer. But he came in and he said, "Hey, you know something? I passed the course. Now I need a raise." I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "How about giving me some time to recover my cost? Because you sat there for 2 weeks, and I paid you for 2 weeks, and I paid all your expenses, hotel, motel, food, everything else. And I paid for the training. How about allowing me just to recover that from you for a couple of months before, and see how well you do with the training you got?" And he looked at me and he said, "I got a job offer down the street. Adios." So don't be a jerk. If you're going to work for someone and someone says, I'm going to send you to training, if you're going to go into business eventually, or you think you're going to go into business eventually, then what you need to do is, I don't know if you should tell them that you're going to go into business, because that could create a problem, but at least be honest enough to let them know how long you plan to stay, because it is a big investment if they're going to train you. Now, of course, you can do a lot of training on your own. Okay? In fact, that's my preference. I buy a book. I train. I read that book. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I read it for 2 hours before the day starts, and my head is ready to go. I'm clear. I'm learning something new. Then at night when I get back, I'm looking at the equipment and I'm trying to program it the way the book says. And I'm looking at YouTubes and I'm talking to people and I'm trying to find out all the details about that product. So that's what, as a technician, that's my advice. If you're a technician just starting out in this field, you're going to have to take a while to learn how things are done, to learn the standards in the industry, to work for other people. And I had a guy one time work for me. He was a Microsoft engineer, MCSE. And when he first applied with me, he was also finishing up working on the LA fire department. He was a captain, in fact, and he was retiring. And he says, I'd like to go into business. He was up front, and I really appreciated that. He goes, I'd like to go into business in being a Microsoft dealer, but I really need to know how to cable. And he said, so I got the Microsoft side down. I've been studying that for years. I practice it. I feel pretty comfortable with that. But would you mind employing me for a year so I can learn this? And I was impressed. The guy really worked hard. He was a great guy. Now, he had the maturity of, I don't know, he was 55 years old or something at the time, so he wasn't a jerk. He didn't act like a jerk, and he fulfilled his promise. He stayed with me for 1 year, and I was always appreciative of that. And I actually had a lot of employees, handful of employees that went off and went into their own business, and they did it in a way that was honorable, acceptable, and they didn't steal from me. And that's another thing you got to watch. People steal. Let me tell you, there's a lot of theft in our industry. But to make a long story short, you got to be those four. You got to be able to function in all four areas. So just because you're a great technician, you better learn accounting, and you better know all the laws that involved in hiring people. You better know contract law. You better know how to form a contract, how to present something in sales. And if you're not an entrepreneur and you've never done sales before, you need to learn sales. Now, I say all these things because a lot of this information is in a book, that one of my favorite books in practical business. I'm not talking about masters in business administration where you learn all about from Peter Drucker and things like that. They're all valuable, but that's a different type of business. This is more practical. I don't think you have to go to school to get a master's in business administration or even go get a bachelor's in business to be successful. A lot of people have not gone to college or don't have a master's, and they went on to be very successful business owners. So the book I recommend, you need to read it. I don't know, maybe it's online. A lot of times I get these books, I download them and I listen to them as a podcast. And so as I'm driving, I'm listening to the book. And sometimes if I do that, I listen to it 4 or 5, 10 times just to make sure I got everything. But the book is called The E-Myth. It deals with the entrepreneurial myth. That's what it actually stands for. And it's Michael Gerber. And it's been out for many, many years. I don't know if it's still published. I hope so, because it's excellent. It talks about a lot of these things that we're talking about today, and I've learned a lot from it also. So, who are you? What are you? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a salesperson? Are you a manager? Most people who are interested in starting IT companies start out as a technician. But you know something? If you don't do the other things, if you don't do your research, if you don't look at what other people are doing and how they're doing it, if you don't spend some time learning business, then I don't know if you're going to be that 1 out of 10 that succeeds. So you got to do your homework, and we're going to be talking about that in future podcasts. I'm going to be very specific on what you need to know to start with, and of course you could always add to that. But today we talked about the 4 personalities. Please go look at that movie, The Founder, and pay attention. See if you can see the 4 personalities, the 4 characteristics, the 4, abilities in these 3 people, the McDonald's brothers and Ray Kroc. And at the same time, when you start to get a marvel for what people do in business, then you're starting to understand. I'll leave with this, but pay attention to those 4 personalities. Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a manager? And when I say manager, I'm also implying, are you a leader? Because that's management. You manage things. You lead people. And then, of course, technician. I'm sure most of you are. And even if you're not in IT, if you're a technician in some other area, it doesn't have to be technical. It could be like Michael Gerber in his book, The E-Myth, says, it could be in baking pies. So it could be it could be other things, but you got to be a technician. And then, of course, you have to be a salesperson. You have to understand sales. You have to understand marketing. things like that. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And always remember, timidity is not a virtue.